Welcome back to our series on XYZ Mesh. I'm Kyle, the creator of XYZ Mesh, and today we'll be going over the menu options over top of the graphing window. XYZ Mesh is a software used to create three-dimensional surface plots from XYZ data. These created plots can then be exported into Microsoft Excel graphs, DXF drawings, CSV data tables, text, and even integrated models. The best part of XYZ Mesh is the ability to share those exported plots with anyone without any extra software required. The first thing we're going to look at is the display tab options. If you click on display, you're going to see the first option is axis. These three options right here indicate the X, Y, and Z axis arms that you see in the center of your plot. You can toggle them on and off to hide the various arms as needed. The next option below that is the ground layer or the grid. Now by default this shows up as a white color. If it becomes a little bit difficult to see, you can change the size of your lines in the grid, or we can change the graph type, which we'll cover at a later time. The next option down is background. Background by default is left by gradient, which will automatically change to light or dark depending on if your data is able to plot within a gradient sphere. Light will give you a light background and dark will give you a dark background. If at any time changing your plotting background, this happens where the display just disappears, all you have to do is rotate the graph and it'll automatically update. The next option below background is color effects, and this is where all the custom coloring comes into play. By default, the color variant is set by percentages. However, you can change this to other color settings. For instance, the lighting and shading, which is one we covered in a previous video, will allow you to change the color based on what you have selected down at the bottom. Color variant percentage will allow you to customize the colors based on a percentage range from the highest percentage being 100% to the lower percentage being 0%. We'll get to the custom coloring in a second. Color variant by values is exactly the same thing, except it will allow you to customize the colors based on values set in the Z-axis. No effect will simply just have it be the standard white color down here, very similar to the shading effect. However, shading and lighting will actually cast a shadow in darker areas, while no effect will just be a flat color. And finally, we're going to get to custom colors, and I'm going to change this back to variant percentage so we can better visualize this effect. If we go into color effects, and then go down to custom colors, it'll take a second for a window to load. However, whenever it does load, it will give us the options to customize our colors to any percentage that we want. On the left hand side, you can see a percentage range going from 100 to 0%, while on the right hand side, you're going to see the highest value down to the lowest value. You can change these colors to reflect on the graph at any certain point. For instance, if you want the 0% instead from being purple to be a lime green, you can change that, and now anything that is in between these two numbers, which is above 0% or 0%, is going to be lime green. Now anything from 0% to 10% is going to fall into the indigo, or we can change this to be gold. Now let's say that you really just botched this up and you hate the colors and you want to go back to the normals. Just click load defaults and it will load everything back to the default variations. It should also be noted that in the right hand side where you can customize the values, you can actually plug in any of these values that you want and it will customize it to that. But it does need to go from the highest value down to the lowest value, so this right here would not actually work, as 33 is not a greater number than 90. Below the color effects, we can go down to visual extras, which right now only has the bordering box. We do plan on adding more than this in the future, but for right now, the bordering box is simply a box that appears around your data so you could better gauge if all of it is being displayed. And below the visual effects is now the information window. The information window, which is also accessible down here, when you open that up, it will bring up a text document for you with a bunch of different calculations about your converted data. Now, depending on what kind of data you have on here, if it's a mesh format or if it's an XYZ format, you're going to have different data presented. By default, you're going to have your average of all the points, which is right here. how many points you have, the grid, the total mesh numbers, the lowest points, highest points, center points, as well as maximum and minimum for each of the values. You can also have a total volume calculation. Now this goes for the top volume and the bottom volume. This is calculated by taking the highest point versus the lowest point. So you have an above surface volume and a below surface volume. You'll also have the options here for the average slope for the plot that you have, as well as the highest slope and the lowest slope. Below that, you have the total points, as well as some more information about those. Moving over from the display, we can go to the graph types, and these are all the different graph types that you have available to you. Points will just simply plot points just like you did in the XYZ plotting. You can then drop that down to lines as well, which will plot lines going in order, and then mesh for a mesh grid. Surface is probably the one that most people are going to be using. Triangles is like a mesh, however, it is triangles instead of mesh. Heat will produce for you a flat graph, either solid or it will be a grid with no Z height variations, just simply colors. Single X and Y, which will only work when you convert to a mesh, will allow you to splice and only show a single line of data. And finally, the default input types. So whenever you first input data into the XYZ input or mesh input, it's going to allow you the option to automatically plot them as lines or points. By selecting either one of those, whenever you first plot data, it's going to populate the main graph here in that format. The same thing with the default graph convert. So as soon as you convert a graph over, you can choose which format you would like to populate the graph as. The next series of menu options we're going to look at is the graph options. If we click on that, the first thing we're going to see is a window state. A docked window is what you see right here, where the main graphing window is contained inside of XYZ Mesh. But if you'd like to have it floating so you can display it on a different monitor or window, you can click floating window. As you can see, the graph now disappears and it has appeared floating in its own window here. You can enlarge this to be any size that you want, and the graph will update accordingly. To get this back to the normal viewing area, you can either go to Graph, Window State, and Docked, or you can simply close out of the floating window and it will automatically appear back inside of XYZ Mesh. Below the window state is the origins. By default, the origin is set to auto, which is going to be right in the center of the arms of the X, Y, and Z coordinates. It averages out the center point between the X, Y, and Z heights to give you a central area. The origin is where you are going to be panning, zooming, rotating, and basically controlling the graph. Next is the reverse mouse order and reverse X and Y. Both of these reverse the way that the mouse operates while you are rotating and zooming around. Basically, these are the two options for inverting controls, like this. So inverted rotations. By default, both of these settings are left off. The next is auto zoom. This will automatically zoom in your converted data so you can see the whole data set. Now, if you would like to turn this off and customize your zoom, you can, but auto zoom is on by default, as most users would be using this. And now we get to the final part of this video, which is the distance calculator. Now with the distance calculator, if you click on it the first time, you're going to see that it changes color and now says select the first point. What the distance calculator does is it will allow you to select points on your plotted area and it will give you information about those points. So for instance, if I was to select this highest point here, you can now see that the point is selected. You can see a little bit of a highlight around it. Let me change the width here so you can better see it. There, you can see that the point is selected. It also says on there to select the second point. Whenever I select a second point, it's going to come up with more information for me. So if I select this point, you can now see we have a line connecting the two, and the information window popped up on my other screen. If you scroll down, you can see that there's new values that have been input based on the points that you have selected. The starting point, which is the first point, and the second point here, the distance between them, and the calculated slope of the angle. If you'd like to clear this out, you could go to the menu options that we covered in the last video, or you can simply just click distance calculator again, and then click select the first point, and now it's cleared out. And believe it or not, that's pretty much it with XYZ Mesh. Now, this video series might have went on for about an hour or so if you watch all of them together, but being able to run through a program from start to finish and looking at every single detail in less than an hour, it's pretty intuitive. If you'd like to try XYZ Mesh out for yourself, the link is in the description down below. I would like to thank you all for watching this video series. If there's anything else that comes up in a later video, we will be adding it to the playlist, so make sure you're subscribed. Thank you all very much, and until next time, have a great rest of your day.